special thanks to Jonathan, Dr. Larson. We are so happy to have you on joining me for What's Bugging My Tree, a regular segment. This way we can approach it with two different perspectives, entomological and also kind of that tree health perspective on things. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So if you are seeing brown shoots on the end of your tree branches, like in this picture, it could be cicada damage, especially given that we are having a really big year for cicadas in this area. So in this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, we're going to talk about cicada damage, what it looks like, what it is, and what it means for your tree, as well as maybe what you can do about it. So I'm delighted to be joined by special guest entomologist Dr. Jonathan Larson to provide more information on cicadas. So, what is cicada damage? Does this picture look familiar to you, Jonathan?
Absolutely. This is one that I think I have featured in at least a couple of different presentations. Pretty classic look at the ovipositor from a different angle on this particular cicada.
So, when we're talking about cicada damage, cicadas cause damage to trees primarily through this egg laying process. So, we're seeing the ovipositor, which is what the cicada is using to lay those eggs in the tree, in their branches. And while this isn't really a major threat to mature, healthy trees, young or stressed trees might experience more significant impacts, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we have cicadas every year in Kentucky and all over. You can find annual cicadas, dog day cicadas emerging, but this year is a different story, right? So what's happening this year?
Well, these are the periodical cicadas. So we've had the bourbon brood, as you alluded to before, or brood 14. They've come out in mass. There's millions, if not billions, of these insects out and about. So we do have annual cicadas that lay their eggs every year, but now we have a real surge in the population of cicadas. So there's more eggs going out. That requires more cuts into the tree. And so there's probably going to be more cicada damage than people are used to.
So you might see this kind of thing every year and not really notice it, like one little branch here or there, no big deal. But because we have so many cicadas this year, it's more evident. So you have your cicada, the females are laying their eggs on this small twig and using this ovipositor to do that. So that kind of cuts these horizontal slits into the twigs, and the eggs are laid there. So here's a picture of some eggs. So those would be normally like inside of the branch, right? They're tiny, you're not going to see them.
People probably aren't going to locate these or find them. You're not going to notice them just sitting out and about. We're used to with some insect eggs like stink bug eggs and a few others that you see these kind of geometric patterns where they're laid on the tree. But these, the female, she has a very strong ovipositor. She pushes it down into that tree's bark and she's injecting those eggs right under the surface. So that way they're not seen, they're not drying out. They are nice and protected. They look like little grains of rice. I've seen a person eat them before and he said they were very sweet. I don't encourage that necessarily, but they are hidden and protected so that people can't do that.
A tasty little snack. Good to know. So when these hatch, they are going to be tiny little cicada nymphs, and then they're going to drop to the ground and burrow into the soil. And we won't see these periodical cicadas for another 17 years, right? So they're going to be there, though. They're going to be feeding on the roots of trees, around, but not something we're going to see for us for this one, 17 years. If you're dealing with a different periodical cicada in a different area, maybe 13 years, but it's going to be a while.
Yes, and the female, she's got about 500 eggs to lay. So as you go through some of these images, you'll see they don't put all 500 of them in one spot. They lay them in batches of about 2 dozen. So that's a lot of little slits that she has to cut into the bark in order to inject her eggs.
And they're going to be they live a long time, just not above ground where we see them, but as they're below ground, they're tunneling, they're feeding on tree roots. It's possible they could cause a little bit of damage to trees, but honestly, this is not a big deal. This is not what we're talking about today in terms of cicada damage to trees. This is probably really minor, and the trees can cope with it just fine. What we're talking about is what you might be seeing right now, right in the middle of this periodical cicada boom, uh, damage to the above ground portion of those trees that's caused by that female laying her eggs. So, at least I don't think of the below ground action of those cicadas being an issue. How about you, Jonathan?
No, the feeding that they're doing down there is pretty minimal. They're not sucking enough sap out of the tree for the tree to really notice. They're very slow eaters. They take 17 years to grow underground, so it's not like there's this pulse of sap that's being pulled out of the tree constantly. It's pretty slow. But this, it does seem to happen like overnight. You go to bed and your tree seems very normal and fine, and then all of a sudden there are these kind of copper or brown patches appearing depending on the species of tree, kind of in the newer growth up towards the tippy top.
And I would call this flagging. So in it's like there's a literal flag like of dead branches or dead leaves in the tree, turning some different color. That is an obvious symptom that something's going on. And are we kind of right now in the peak of our cicada boom for the summer?
I would say so. It does seem like things are maybe kind of coming down on the other side of the roller coaster. I'm hearing fewer of them on the south side of town, and I'm noticing fewer of them kind of buzzing around. So I think that we're kind of, excuse the ambulance as it drives by, they're kind of coming down off of their high, but that means that the females will be turning to the trees to lay their eggs, and so the next round of things will be the flagging, as you mentioned.
So we'll see more of this. And anytime you got a big year for cicadas, this is something you can expect. So what you're seeing here is that the twigs and branch tips have been killed because you've had that female cicada laying her eggs below there. So they're going to many times kind of remain attached to the tree, at least for a little while. And you might see something like this, where all the new shoots of the tree, or many of them, have been killed. And if we were to look a little bit closer, you could see that sure enough, it's those individual shoots that have that damage. And if we look even a little bit closer to that, what you would see are the broken stems and the evidence that that female cicada has been laying her eggs there.
I actually just had an agent send me some images a moment ago of this, and she referred to it as stitching, which I think is very evocative of kind of what it looks like. The cicada is going down in a line and she's cutting these slits, and it does look like almost she's stitching her needle through the tree as she sows her eggs. And it does sometimes create enough damage that the twig, the branch, it will rip and tear and then flag even further and then fall to the ground, which is ideal for the baby cicadas that are going to come out. One of the questions that we get about this is why does she put her eggs in the tree rather than in the soil if they're going to live in the soil anyway? And I can't explain that. That's just a quirk of evolution, basically. But this is a wetter and more protected area. It might be that that's just better for the egg overall. The ground could be dry and sort of shrivel those eggs up. But she's going to put them in there. They're going to hatch. Either the branch is going to fall down and then they'll scurry out of the branch and then dig their way into the ground, or if that doesn't happen, they have to march their way down the tree to the soil. And along the way, they get picked off by ants and all kinds of other things. So it's a very arduous process, no matter what life stage you're in as a periodical cicada. Everybody
And
wants to eat you.
oh yeah, yeah, including me. I've eaten a few this year, so
Very good, very good.
so, here's a picture that you sent of showing that broken twig, and you can actually see the eggs inside, which is super cool. Maybe if you're really curious, you can go out and check some of your trees as well. And here's some of that stitching, those slits that are made by the female cicadas. So something to keep an eye out for. But maybe more apparent would be if you've got a whole bunch of leaves, and not just leaves, but the tips of those branches, because it's not going to be like a leaf here or there as much as these little branch tips that are scattered all over the ground around there. And, we did get a question from someone. Do cicadas only eat on the tree they were first hatched from? And I know that they like to travel up things and find new locations. Do you want to talk about that?
They do go up and down pretty frequently, sort of as they come out of the ground and then where they're looking to molt their last exoskeleton. When they're in the soil, they can move sort of side to side in the soil profile. So they could go to a nearby tree, especially if the original tree they were feeding at is taken out, harvested, taken out by a flood or what have you. So they are mobile, they can move around, but it's not a great distance. So yeah, most likely they are going to kind of stay local. They'll live in the same hometown their whole life, basically, and that'll be their tree.
So another kind of related question is which trees are impacted? A question that I've heard is, do they prefer certain species or are they pretty generalist in their approach? And it seems like they can lay their eggs on all sorts of things. So deciduous trees are going to be a magnet for cicadas. Do they have any preferences or things that you've noticed?
Their favorite trees are oaks. They kind of like the longer lived species. Oaks represent that, I think, the best in this area. They also like things kind of in watersheds and water corridors. They like to be kind of near a creek or near a stream. And we often have a lot of oaks in those places as well. They'll use maples. One of the big questions we get every time this happens is with fruit trees. So they will go into orchards occasionally and wreak havoc. Historically, they also used elm and ash, but both of those have experienced sort of catastrophic invasive species. So I think it's really the oaks. That's kind of what we're most interested in, most concerned with here in Kentucky.
And do you ever see them in conifers or is it just the hardwoods?
I've only ever seen them in the hardwoods. I haven't seen them use evergreens. I know that they'll crawl up evergreens. I've had pictures submitted from some junipers and some arborvitae earlier this year of them kind of crawling up those. I had people asking about ferns and things like that that they were sitting on. I don't think that they're using those as egg laying hosts. If there's an image that somebody can produce of the slits, that would, of course, change my opinion on that. But for the most part, it seems like these bigger, more longer lived hardwood species.
Excellent. And just a note that while we're showing pictures today of cicada damage, there are lots of other things that can kind of do the same thing in your trees. So right now, I'm seeing a lot of fungal foliar issues in trees. We've had a really wet spring, so uh, fungal leaf diseases are happening. And those might look a little bit different, but at a distance, you might see some similar symptoms flagging in the branches. This is one that I see more in the fall, but look how similar it looks to cicada damage, right? It looks very similar to everything we've talked about. This is Botryospermia canker, a disease. You might see insects doing very similar things, as well as even squirrels might result in, the tips of branches winding up on the ground. Other things, Dr. Larson, that you've seen that could be easily mixed up?
Sometimes just like wind damage and things like that. Anything that kind of cracks and creaks those things so they flag and hang in the tree. Sometimes we get questions about twig girdlers and things, twig pruners, but that usually is fallen out of the tree, so it looks more like your last image before of the kind of widespread carnage of everything laying on the ground. But yeah, if I were strolling around campus and I saw this tree, I would say that's cicada damage, but I am not a pathologist, so I would be
Well,
incorrect.
And one thing you could do is, I mean, if you got questions, you could look a little bit more closely. So if I were to look close up at this one, I would see that I'm not seeing that cicada damage right here where it goes from dead to healthy. And I am seeing this tiny little sunken canker, and you can't really see it, but if you look up close, you could see it. Similar with some of those twig girdlers, you'd notice different ways in which that wood is damaged. If it's just dropping individual leaves and they have more different patterns of dead tissue on it, I might think a fungal foliar issue. So, look around and see what you can observe with that. But right now, we are seeing a lot of cicada damage because we have a lot of cicadas. So, when it comes to kind of what do we do about this issue, for large trees, this might look bad, but the trees will likely bounce back and recover well. These periodical cicadas only appear in large groups once every 17 years for this group, maybe 13, depending on where you're located for a different year. A relatively rare occurrence. So they're going to kill some new shoots, but the trees have a long time to recover, and it's typically not a big issue. Um, On the other hand, if we're talking about like small trees, recently planted trees, I could see this being more concerning, especially if it only has, one shoot and that one shoot is killed by a cicada. Maybe the tree will recover, but it will have more impacts from that. How about you, Dr. Larson? Similar?
I would totally agree. I mean, we're talking about scope and scale, right? So if it's a mature, majestic 25-year-old oak tree out in your landscape, it has plenty of other canopy that wasn't affected, so it's still going to have green leaves. It'll bounce right back as long as it doesn't have a gaping wound or something down at the base, some other underlying issue. But then when you look at this smaller tree, we're talking about a much greater percentage of its canopy being affected, even if it had fewer numbers of cicadas on it. So that's when we get concerned. That's when we start telling people if you planted the tree last year, if you run a tree nursery, I work with the nursery industry frequently. Maybe it would behoove you to wrap this tree or to take some other steps, which I know you've got some cool pictures of too.
Well, and here's some pictures of some trees that are wrapped that I found, some fruit trees in someone's yard. And so I am not familiar if they're doing it right or if you have any other tips for them. But this is something to protect trees before they start having this damage. Once you've got all those dead shoots, it's a little late. I mean, you can still do it, but the damage has been done.
Right. The thing that I would say right now is it's better late than never. You probably still will have some damage, but if you put this netting on right now, you will prevent further damage from occurring. You don't want to net them in the tree, so you want to shake it a little bit before you actually enclose it. I like this image a lot because I talk about netting your tree, and you'll read people sort of give guides online, and it's always presented as this rather simple task, like you just wrap the tree up like a mummy, and everything's great. But I think that this picture shows you there is some difficulty with this. I mean, you've got to enclose an entire tree. You have to figure out how to secure it. And even then, life finds a way. There's some tree branches that are poking out of parts of this wrapping. So it will help. It will prevent a lot of damage. It's not going to be 100%, but it is 100% organic and it's pure IPM. This is mechanically, or I would say physically excluding these species from being able to use this tree.
And you mentioned organic. Are there other options that people are should consider or maybe try and aren't as effective?
I've had a lot of questions this year. So I've worked here for 6 years, and I would say 3 or 3.5 of those years I've had cicada questions. And this year I've had the most questions about wrapping the base of your tree in aluminum foil. People asking if that would prevent them from being able to get onto the branches. And I have to say, sadly, that I don't think that would help us very much because once they're winged, they're able to fly around in the branches from tree to tree. They're not really using the trunk to gain access to those upper limbs. So I don't think that's going to be very helpful. It would look interesting. Maybe it would prevent some other problems, but I don't think that that's going to help you with cicadas. There are sprays that we can use. There's not going to be a lot of organic options. We would be talking about much heavier duty insecticides, things that are contact products. And these are things that I'm wary of telling the average homeowner, yeah, climb on a ladder and spray this 4 feet up into the air while it drifts back onto you because they're not always the safest of things for that kind of application. So this is the way that we want homeowners to approach this issue. If you are a woodland owner, if you are a tree nursery owner, an orchard owner, we do have other pieces of advice that we might provide that would involve some heavier duty insecticides. But I'm also trying to preserve these insects. I hope I don't sound too cagey when I'm giving this answer because I think it's important that we protect them. They're the guardians of time down underground. There are teenage bugs that come out, and I think it's worthwhile to sort of sacrifice some of our tree branches, tree limbs, tree twigs, whatever you want to call it, to them. And if we can't afford that, then we can use this mechanical method here.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, it's not needed. These trees are going to be fine in a forest setting. This is not going to be an issue for the health of those trees. In a home landscape setting, this is not going to be something that for your larger trees is going to change the health trajectory for that tree. But maybe if you've got a smaller tree in your home landscape and you just planted it, this is anytime, but especially this year, you might want to take good care of it. You might want to mulch around the tree and make sure it's protected and from mower damage, as well as creating the right conditions around it, just giving it every advantage you can. If we, right now, it feels like it's been raining a lot, but if we hit some dry weather, make sure you're watering it properly, giving it that extra support. And that's true anytime for a newly planted tree, but maybe especially this year as it might have to deal with some added stress. In addition, if you were planting some big tree planting for this summer, you may want to reconsider that. But summertime really isn't the best time for tree planting anyway. So hold off until the fall or even the following spring and you'll be better off. With that, hopefully you learned a little bit more about cicadas and the damage you're seeing in trees. And while we may be having this major year for these periodical cicadas, it's good to remember that this only happens once every 17 years. And in most cases is not a problem. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this rare, although maybe a little bit loud, natural spectacle that we have. I'm with you, Dr. Larson, in that I'm enjoying the cicadas, or at least telling myself that I'm enjoying their beautiful sounds very loudly, because I know it's going to be short. I know it's going to be short, brief event.
My daughter is sitting outside trying to learn how to communicate with them. She's screaming at them just like they're screaming at her. It's a very interesting biological phenomenon. You were stressing it only happens every 17 years. That makes it unique in the entire natural world. It's really something that other people seek to experience. I know that we are living in it, and so that's a little different than doing some visits and doing cicada tourism. But I hope that people can kind of step back from their primary mode of, well, why is this happening to me? Thinking and think, why is this so beautiful? Why is this so weird? Why is this so wonderful? And hopefully be a little appreciative of our little clock keepers here that are out screaming in the trees and laying their eggs.